Okay, welcome back. This is the second part of fractions, that is in grade 10. Here we have problem solving questions. It is bit complex to the ones I have already done. Now even in the first part we did a few, I think around 2 questions that is related to problem solving. Now even here you have problem solving questions. It is bit complex. That is, we have problems to be done using the remaining part, that you will understand when I do few examples. Now for an example, let me just explain you. Say there is a question saying a person from his full salary, maybe one fifth is taken for his expenses at home. Okay, so 1/5 is the expenses. Now they will further say you that out of the remaining, maybe 2/3 is taken for some other purposes. Out of the remaining, now here they say remaining. Understand? They will not give you separately. They will say you 2/3 of the remaining. Did you get this part? 2/3 of the remaining. Understand? Now the main difference here is that first, since you know 1/5 of the fall salary is for the expenses, now from this you have to find the remaining. Now if 1/5 is for the expenses, what is the balance? That you already know how to find. If 1/5 is the expenses, then in order to find the remaining part, yes, you have to subtract and get it how much? It will be 4/5. Out of these 4/5, 2/3 is the remaining part. Understand? This is taken for, what did I say you? Maybe we'll take it for education. Understand? Now the amount in fraction that is used for education, you have to find it. Yes, how do you find it? 2/3 of the of means multiplication, so of the remainder. Was that clear? Now you have to solve, get the fraction. Now this is the portion from the total salary that is used for education. Understand? Now these are the types of questions we have further. Let me explain you some examples. Now in these types of questions we cannot give you the exact teaching. Understand? Now here what we can do is we can discuss few examples, and through these examples you have to understand the way of doing. Understand? This is not like other units. We cannot just direct you in few steps. We have to just give you few examples, and through the examples you have to understand the way of doing. It's just a matter of understanding. Simplification is easier because already you have learned how to multiply, add, subtract of fractions. That is already learned. Understand? Okay, therefore let us move on to the very first example, past paper model question. So here, now these are the types of questions you get for the exams also. Okay, so before you start these types of questions, you can also draw diagrams. Okay, on a side let us just draw diagrams. Okay, first let us read this part. They say a man allocated 1/6 of bought land to make the house. That means, say he has the house, you should have 6 equal parts. So I divide this into 6 equal parts, and out of this, one part is allocated for house. Okay, so one part is allocated for house, and 2/3 of the balance to cultivate permanent crops. Now here you have to first, now you know how much is the what is the fraction for house. So it is 1/6. Okay, also when 1/6 out of 6 parts, when one part is used for the house, you know the the balance value. How much is it? Yes, the balance is, the remainder is, how do you subtract? You take the whole land as 1, and from 1 you subtract 1/6. That is going to give you 5/6. This is the balance. Now out of this balance, they are saying you 2/3 of the balance is used to cultivate permanent crops. So for permanent crops, how do you find permanent? So you have to find, yes, 2/3 of the balance. 2/3 of means multiplication, so 2/3 of the balance is 5/6. Okay, if you solve this, you will be getting the answer. Also they are saying you he allocated the rest for temporary crops. Now how do you find the rest? Rest means the final remainder you get, the final balance. So how do you find? Now this is the way. from the total house, a part is taken for house. From the total land, a part is taken for house. Also, a part is taken for permanent crops. And from the total land, the remainder you get once you add all these. Now, once you add house and the part for permanent crops, and finally you get a remainder. Now, the remainder is equal to temporary crops. Was that clear? So how do we find out? So you have to add this, and then from the total you have to subtract and get the balance that will be equal to temporary crops. So what is the first one? What is the first question? It asks us to find the which amount of whole land is allocated for permanent crops. So permanent crops, how do we find? 2/3 of the balance. So you know the balance, that is 5/6. So 2/3 of the balance will give you, how much is it? 5/9. Okay, this is the part that is for permanent crops, so I call it Roman number 1. So let us move on to Roman number 2. What are they saying here? Find the part allocated for temporary crops. Now, so how do you find temporary crops? Yes, I have already taught you now. Now you know how much is the value for house, that is 106. Also you have to add the value that is allocated for permanent crops, that is 5/9. Now let us add both of these. Now since the denominators are not same, so you have to find the LCM of these two. The LCM is 36. So I multiply this by 6, this by 6, this by 4, this by 4. So here I get 26/36. This is the total, that is for what? House and temporary crops. Okay. Then from the total, I have already taught you now, already I told you here that you take the total as 1. Now this you know from your early knowledge. So from the total, if they are considering all this for both house and permanent crops, how do you find the balance? Yes, you have to subtract. I told you take the whole part as 1, and from that you subtract the part that is taken for permanent crops and for the house. So you get a total of 26/36. So how much is it? Yeah, consider this denominator as 1. Therefore, it is going to give you 10/36. This is the balance. The balance is allocated for temporary crops. I hope this part is clear. Okay, try to understand this part. So 10/6 is for temporary crops. Okay, let us read further. That is the okay. Now here they have said further. Okay, this is not the third one. The land which is allocated for temporary crops is divided into 5 equal columns. Now once we find this amount, there is a part for temporary crops. Now this part is divided into 5 equal columns, and out of that, one column is equal to 2.5 meters square. Now, and they are asking you to find the area of the whole land. Whole land means the part that is used for house, permanent crops, and for temporary crops. The total he bought. Understand? Okay, now in order to solve these questions, now since you know, now once the temporary crops is divided into 5 equal parts, and out of that you know one part, right? So in order to find the total of temporary crops, how do you find? Yes, since it is divided by 5, you have to again multiply by 5. That will give you the total amount for temporary crops. Okay, so I have to multiply 2.5 meters squared by 5. That is going to give me the total amount for temporary crops. How much is it? 12.5 meters squared. This is the total amount for temporary crops. That means this fraction is equal to 12.5 meters squared. Okay, in other words, 10/6 is equal to 12.5 meters squared. Now what should you find? The total land. So how do you find the total? Any idea? Yes, isn't it easy? Now it is like this. The total land is divided into 36 parts. Okay, out of that 10 part is for temporary crops, and some other part is for permanent, and some other part is for house. Now this is the part you know where 12.5 is equal to 10 parts. So in order to find the whole land, you have to find what is the amount for 36 parts. So 10 parts is equal to 12.5. So what should you do? You have to divide 12.5 by 10. That will give you the value of one part, and then you have to again multiply by 36. Okay, so let me do it here. So I have to multiply, yes. Okay, first let me divide 12.5 by 10. That will give me the value for one part. And again you have to multiply by 36 because the whole land consists of 36 parts. So in value, so you have to consider the units also. So here the value you get is 45 meters squared. Okay, I hope this part is clear. Okay, then let us move on to the last part. Okay, so moving on to the fourth part, they say, let us check the fourth one. The land which is allocated for permanent crops is divided into 5 equal columns. Okay, show that the area of one column is equal to 5 meters squared. Now already you know the amount that is allocated for permanent crops in fraction form. You know it. How much is it? You have already found out that it is equal to 5 over 9. Okay, therefore I can say that 5 over 9, that is the amount allocated for permanent crops. Okay, that is also equal to 5 over 9. Okay, I'll say it, permanent crops. Okay, now this land is again divided into 5 equal columns. Okay, so I have to divide this 5 over 9 by how much? By 5. So how do you do a division? So division turns into multiplication and you write the reciprocal. So if you write the reciprocal, you get 1 over 5. So you can simplify, you get 1 over 9. This is the value in fraction form you get when you divide the total land of permanent crops into 5 equal parts. So one part is equal to this. Okay, now you have to show that this value is equal to how much? 5 meters squared. Okay, now you have to, in order to get the answer, you have to take an answer that is already given. Now if I say, when I say already given, that is, you know this part already, right? 10 over 36 is equal to 12.5 meters squared. So the next step what I am going to do is, I am going to write that 10 over 36 is equal to 12.5 meters squared. Now using this fraction, this statement, I am going to build up this fraction and find out how much is that. Now if you take this statement, you know both the left hand side and the right hand side. But when you consider this, you only know the left hand side, you should get the right hand side, right? So from this, I'm going to find out how much is 1 over 9. Now look carefully. Now I am going to change this fraction 10 over 36 into 1 over 9. Okay. Now I can do it in other ways. How do I get 1 over 9 multiplying by what number? You have a numerator and a denominator. Now already multiplication is done. So you have to find by what fraction. By what fraction if I multiply this 1 over 9 is going to give me 10 over 36. By what should you multiply? Look here. 9 into how much will give you 36? 9 into 4. And also 1 into how much will give you 10? 10. Was that clear? Now if you multiply, how much are you going to get? 10 over 36. Okay. So now observe. You can write this as, now this total 10 over 36, you can write it this way also, no? So you can write how much? 1 over 9 multiplied by 10 over 4 is equal to 12.5 meters squared. Okay, now what is the amount I have to find out? You have to find out 1 over 9. That means you have to send this part, yeah, from the left hand side. So how do you send? So in other words, you can just send it to the other side. Or since this is multiplied, since this is the numerator, you can, yes, multiply by 10 in the denominator, and in the numerator you can multiply by 4. So rather than that, I'll send it to the other side. So you have 12.5 meters squared. Since this is in the denominator, I have to send it to the numerator. And also since 10 is in the numerator, I send it to the denominator. So once you simplify this, 1 over 9 is going to give you how much? 38. So it is going to give you 1, 2, 1, 2, 12, 24, 36, 48. That is going to give you 50, and divide by 10 is going to give you 5 meters squared. So the answer they have given and the answer we have got is both correct, right? So you can say one column is equal to 5 meters square. Okay, was that clear? Now in this question the fourth part is bit complex. Understand, for grade 10s you will not get complex as this, but maybe these are okay, right? The questions you have in your book and the ones you will get for the exams are somewhat based on 1 to 3. Okay, so you need not worry if you don't get the answer for the fourth one. Let us try more questions based on this. Okay, let us move on to one more question. This is also from a model paper. The second question, let us discuss this part. Okay, second question. Here they say, the B part, Mr. Amal spends 1/5 of his salary to buy food materials. Okay, now from the total of his salary you can draw diagrams also. Okay, the diagrams, for some questions the diagrams will help you in order to find the answers, but only the diagram is not enough. You have to write statements, you have to show your calculations also. Okay, so Amal is spending 1/5 of his salary to buy food materials. So for food, what is the amount? See, you have 1/5. Okay, 1/5 is for the food, and half of the remaining for his children's education. Now what is the remaining? Yes, you have to first find the remaining amount. Half of the remaining. Now in order to find the amount that is spent for children's education, first you have to find how much is the remainder. So you consider the total part as 1 minus 1/5 will give you how much? 4/5. Now you know the remainder, so now you can proceed in finding the amount for children's education. So children's education, now the questions might be given here. So okay, for children's we just write it. Okay, short forms. Half of the remainder is how much? 4/5. So when you solve this, you will be getting the amount for children's education. And finally the person is depositing, then he deposits balance 15,000 in a bank. That means after he spent this amount for food and after spending this amount for his child's education, finally he has a balance of 15,000. So how do you find the balance? I have already taught you. Yes, this is the way. In order to find the balance, first you have to add this food plus all the expenses, food and the amount spent on education, and you will get an answer. From that you have to find the balance. Okay, that is the amount spent, deposited in the bank. Okay, I hope that was clear. So Roman number 1, they are asking you, write the remain amount after buying food materials as a fraction of the whole salary. That is easier. This is the answer, right? The remaining amount, 4/5. These are the possible questions you get for grade 10. Okay, so 4/5, this you have already found out. What is the second one? Write the amount spent for children's education as a fraction. Okay, now these are, you have to just deal it with fractions. Now you have to find the fraction that is spent on children's education. Now this part, right, I did not do it again. So how much? Half of the balance, half of 4/5. So when you solve this, get 1 here, 2. So the answer you get is 2/5. This is the amount as a fraction who Amal has spent on children's education. I hope that part was clear. Now what is the third one? Roman number 3, they request you to, what is the part that he remains after spending for food materials and education? This is like the amount he deposited in the bank, the balance he has, but you have to write as a fraction. What is the part? So how do you find out? Now you know, first you have to add all the expenses. Food plus education. Those are the expenses. Two expenses are given. So what is the amount for food? That is 1/5. Plus what is the amount for children's education? That is, you have 2/5. So the total is going to give you 3/5. Okay, this is the total expenses. Total expenses. Now in order to find the balance, yes, you have to consider the, so balance, I'll say balance. So you have to consider the total part as 1, and from that you have to subtract 3/5. How much is it? 2/5. This is the balance. This balance is equal how much? They say then he deposits his balance in 15,000 in a bank. So the balance he has is 15,000. That 15,000 is equal to 2 over 5. So you can also say 2 over 5 is equal to 15,000. Okay, I hope this part is clear. What is the fourth one? You can just solve it here. Now these are the questions you get for grade 10. Now you should be capable of doing these types of questions. Okay, there is nothing big to calculate. The only thing you should know is how to do it, how to deal with these remaining parts. They will mostly say this part of remaining. Then you should be knowing how to find the remainder and then the way of multiplying. That's all you have here. Understand? And then you have an addition. All the questions go through the same procedures. Okay. So finally, you have to find what is Mr. Amal's salary. Now salary means it is the total amount, right? Now once you added this all that, you got the total expenses and then you found the balance. Balance is 2 out of 5. Now what is this 5 parts? 5 is the, yes, it is the total amount, the total salary. Out of that 2 parts is the balance, and maybe some part for children's education and some part for food. Okay, so he is saving a amount of 2 portions as a fraction, that is equal to 15,000. So you know, in order to find the total salary, you have to find how much is this 5. You know, from this 5, 2 parts is equal to 15,000. So how do you find 15? Sorry, how do you find the total amount for 5? So you have to, yes, since they have given 15,000, you have to divide it by 2. That will give you the amount for one part, and in order to find the total, you have to multiply by 5. So how much is it? It will give you, it's going to give you 37,500. That is the total salary Mr. Amal gets. Okay, also don't forget you have one more question. Okay, some people after getting the total salary, they just ignore the last part, they forget it actually. So you don't have to forget it, since it is given. You have to go after doing each of the questions, just put a tick. Understand? Okay, and the fifth one, find the amount spent for education. Now you know the total salary and you know how much is out of the total salary, you know how much is 2 parts. Now let us first find for education what was the fraction. Education, this 205, right? Now also when solving, you got 205 is equal to some amount. How much is that? It is actually, the answer is given, nothing to solve. So 205 is equal to 15,000. You can say 15,000 is spent on education. Now out of his total salary, 15,000 is spent on education. Also 15,000 is spent on, he is finally keeping it in the, depositing it in the bank, and then the remaining 7,500 is taking it for food. Those are his expenses. Okay, so I hope this part is clear. Let us solve one more question. Let us discuss one more. This also I took it from a past paper, model paper. Here they say, I hope this part, this is also somewhat similar to the ones you have solved. Okay, this is from the syllabus. So here they say Tharanga deposited, okay, Tharanga deposited half of his salary, monthly salary, in a bank account. Okay, now from his salary, now diagrams I did not mark it there. If you want, you can just mark it. Okay, for some questions it is very useful. So here, how much is the amount he is depositing in the bank? So bank is exactly depositing half. Okay, so what is the remainder? Remainder is also half. Now from that remainder, they have given you some question to solve. Now see, from rest means what? After depositing half, the balance he has, balance is also half. From rest he allocated 3/5 for food and 1/5 for transport. Was that clear? Okay, that is the way of doing it. Now here it is not a bit, it is unclear, because here actually what they are saying you is that for food, the state, okay, first you have to find the balance. So balance is going to give you half. That is just, okay, common sense. Now here the amount that is spent on food, the way of finding is this. They are saying it separately. 3/5 of the remainder. Now see, from rest, 3/5 is spent for food. and separately they are saying you that 1/5 of the remainder is spent for transport. So you have to get it separately. So you have to write two statements. One is for food. How do you state? 3/5 of the remainder. Remainder is half. Also they say transport also you have to state it separately. How is that? 1/5 of half of the balance. Okay, now these are the expenses he has. Okay, so let us move on with the question. Also one important statement is given that finally 1,000 was the balance in his hand. So after spending all this for transport, for food and for bank, finally he has a balance of 1,000 rupees. So you have to solve one by one. Let us move on. First question, they say what is the fraction spent for food out of his monthly salary? So what is the amount spent for food? So you have to multiply 3/5 of half. How much is it? 3/10. Okay, I hope this part is clear. 3/5 of this. Okay, that part is clear. And the next part is that Roman number 2, they're asking you what is the fraction spent for food and transport out of his monthly salary. So in order to find for the amount that is spent on food and transport, you have to add both of these. So you know the value of this. So what is the value of this? 1/10. So you have to just find the addition of 3/10 plus 1/10. How much is it? It is equal to 4/10. This is the amount spent on what? Food and transport. Make it clear. Okay, so third one is done. Sorry, second one. And let us move on to the third part. What are they saying here? What is the fraction of balance on his hand out of his monthly salary? Now you have to find the balance. How do you find? If you have to consider all the expenses in the sense you have to take, yes, the amount that is spent for bank and then food and transport. You have to add all. Now since these two are added and you have 4/10, so with this answer I'll add the amount that is deposited in the bank, that is equal to half. Okay, is that clear? You have to add all these three since these two are added. So with this total I'll be adding half. So half plus 4/10. So I make it 5, I'll multiply by 5, that is going to give you 9/10. Okay, this is the total. What fraction of balance on his hand out of his monthly salary? This was the total expenses. How do you find the balance? You can directly say the balance is equal to 1/10. I hope this part is clear. From 1 you have to subtract this amount. You found the total expenses and then from 1 you subtract this amount, that is going to give you the balance. Okay, that is much easier. So okay, and then moving on to the fourth one. What is Taranga's monthly salary? You have to find her salary. Now you know what is this 10? That is the total part of her salary. The salary is altogether divided into 10 equal parts, and out of that one part is the balance. Okay, also here they have said that the balance was 1,000. Then this balance also is equal to 1,000. That means if you take a salary and divide it into 10 equal parts, out of that one part is equal to 1,000. So how do you find the total salary? You have to, since you know the value of one part, in order to find the total you have to multiply this 1,000 by how much? By 10. Okay, so how much is it? It is equal to 10,000. So her total salary is equal to 10,000. You have to just multiply this by 10. Next, find the simplest ratio in between money that Taranga deposited in the bank and the money Taranga allocated for transport. Bank and transport. You have to find the simplest ratio. It is like finding the amount and writing as a ratio and then simplifying. So you should know what is the amount she deposited in the bank. Now do you know that amount? No, you have not found it out. But do you know the amount that is spent for transport? Even that. Okay, now what is the amount in fraction, the value in fraction for transport? 1 over 10. But you also know that 1 over 10 is equal to how much? 1000. So you know the amount that is spent on transport. How much is that? That is equal to 1000. Now you need this amount. So how do you get it? You should know how much was spent on bank. Okay. So how do you find? Now observe. Half, right? How do you get from 1 over 10? Now the only detail you know is this. From this somehow you should get, yes, half. So what is the simplest way of doing? You can do it in many ways. Okay. Now total salary is equal to 10 parts now. Out of that, half is taken for bank. If total is 10 means, actually how many parts were taken to deposit in the bank? Out of 10, 5 parts are taken. Therefore, you should know the answer of 5 out of total 10 parts. So you have to find out. How do you find 5 over 10? It is like 1 over 10 multiplied by 5. No? Since you know this amount, that is equal to 1000 rupees, in order to get 5 over 10, you have to just multiply by 5. So you multiply 1000 by 5. So how much is it? It is equal to 5000. So from her 10,000 salary, she is depositing 5,000 in the bank, and from the rest 5,000 she is doing all these expenses. Understand? So you have 5,000 here. So if you write it in the simplest ratio, it is equal to 5 over 1. Now these are the possible questions you get for the exams, and those are the ones in your syllabus. Okay, some might be a bit hard, but always you have to use this method procedure. Understand? I'll state the procedure again. Always they will give you start of the question, they might give you a certain part, a fraction is taken for some other purpose, and from the remaining they start going further. So you have to first find the balance, the remainder, and then multiply. Of means multiplication. So they say 3/5 of the balance. So you have to multiply and find how much for food. So they will say you this, half of this, 3 or 4th of balance, all that. So you have to find all the expenses separately. And finally they will deal with the final balance, the final amount you have. So how do you find? In order to find the final balance, first you have to add all the expenses. Understand? Now what some people do is they add these expenses and they add these expenses, they forget about the initial amount. That is not the way. You have to consider all the expenses done. That is the only important point you have to remember here. Understand? In order to find the balance, you have to first add all the expenses. All the expenses mean you have to take the initial part also. You have to add this, this, this. Then you will get an answer. From that, you find the balance. Okay. I hope this lesson was clear. In order to catch up with this part, you have to solve more questions. Therefore, just solve all the questions in your book. And for any doubts, you can contact us. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe the channel.